watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Kelley Blue Book has revealed January's average transaction price for new vehicles, and it's down from December. Joining us now with more on the price data and other shifts happening in the industry is Brian Moody, who's the Cox Automotive Executive Editor. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here at CBT News.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. So the report highlights a decline in new vehicle transaction prices by 3.5% year over year. And of course, that's compared to last month. But what do you believe are the primary factors driving this downward trend?
Well, some of it has to do with incentives, but a lot of it has to do with supply. So remember a year and a half ago, if we were having this conversation, we would be having a conversation about a lack of cars, how consumers can't find the car they want. They can't find the color they want. There just aren't that many. And this would be for both new and used cars. But today versus, say, a year and a half ago, the number of new and used cars separately, both new and both used, are double than what they were. So there's plenty of cars out there. And January is typically a little bit of a slow selling season anyway. So I think all those things are conspiring to bring the transaction price down somewhat.
Sure. How are automakers responding to these market conditions that we see?
Well, we see them pulling the lever of incentives. What's interesting is that incentives versus a year ago, as a part of the transaction price, are up nearly 100%. So say a year ago, it would have been difficult to find an incentive that would have made up more than 2.5 or 3% of the purchase price of the car. Today, that's closer to 6%. It's 5.7. So that's pretty significant for consumers if you look at an incentive that could make up that much of the price. And you see lots of advertised leases and low APR too, which is very beneficial in the long run when you have a car loan.
Yeah, that's for sure. And obviously affordability is at the top of both OEMs list as well as dealers. We're butting on $50,000 for the price of a new car, almost $60,000 for the price of a new EV. Talk to us about that. That's got a real concern for people out there in the industry.
Right. One thing that I don't think consumers know, and so this is something that I think dealers can help to educate the consumer. A lot of consumers assume that electric cars are still very expensive. And many times they are. That depending on what you get a Mercedes-Benz, of course, it's very expensive. Those cars are those are luxury cars. But the price of electric cars overall has come down quite considerably to the point where the average price spent for a consumer on your typical electric car is now below the average price or the average transaction price of a luxury car. It used to be way higher. A lot of this is driven by Tesla slashing their prices by more than 20%, but others have followed. So I think the story there is if a consumer thinks, I just can't afford an electric car, that might not be true anymore.
Yeah, for sure. How much of an impact do discounts and incentives have on consumer behavior?
I think quite a bit, because it just has the impression of I can get a good deal. And that's what people are always asking. How do I get the best deal? A lot of vehicles, the price is the barrier. I think that's why you see some of these electric car prices coming down, because that's the barrier. For other people, there's no barrier at all. We see luxury vehicles still 20% of the market, near 20% of the market. Well, that means a lot of people are opting to buy more expensive cars. So clearly not everyone's in the same boat, but incentives help the average consumer or the budget-based consumer say, hey, I might be able to get a good deal now. At least I'll start looking, or I'll go down there and see what they can do.
Sure. Prior to COVID, we saw, numbers around 20 to 30% of the market for leasing. And then obviously after COVID hit, leasing came way down. Are we seeing that coming back around again, or what is it going to take for us to see 25, 30% lease penetration out there industry wide? It seems to me that would be the answer to some of this affordability issue.
Yes, I totally agree. So one of the things we're seeing is, in addition to low APR or some cash back, we're seeing more subsidized leases being advertised as deals. And so in some cases, again, the weird thing about this, and I think there's a really strong education piece here. Are interest rates high? Yes. But at the same time, you can find a subsidized lease or a low APR that is very low.
Yeah.
So there's no more, it's true for everything or one size fits all. That's the hard part. Qualifying, this car has this, but that car doesn't, even within the same brand. That's the difficult education part, I think.
Right. What kind of impact do new vehicle transaction prices have on used car values and the overall used car industry?
Well, they're related, because what we saw during COVID was that as the new car prices went up, everybody thinks they have a unique idea. I'll go looking for a lightly used car. Well,
Sure.
literally everyone was thinking that. So then it drives the price of used cars up.
Yep.
With the abundance of new cars and those incentives, it puts price pressure down on used cars as well. And we have seen a little bit of lower wholesale prices for some used cars. And that's, of course, going to translate, or maybe already is translating, to slightly lower listing prices and lower prices for used cars.
Sure. Over the last few years, I mean, in 2019, I think we were running at like 17 million SAR. And then obviously that dropped back down because of the availability of vehicles to 15 million and such. We've kind of been floating around that number. Will that cost us in the long run in terms of this shortage of 8 or 9 million vehicles delivered over the course of the last 3 years, or I should say the shortage of them in the used car market? Also couple that with the lack of leasing, because as you know, leasing fed the used car market. Where is that going to be in 2024? Will that suddenly hit and everybody say, oh my God, we don't have enough used cars?
I think there's a possibility of that, yes, especially when you get into some very specific cars. So the high volume cars, I think there's always going to be enough of those. The kinds that you typically see as the best sellers year after year, decade after decade, there's a top 20 that those are probably going to be okay. But when you start to get into specific equipment, I want the nicest one, I'm looking for a lightly used one, or when you get away from the more popular brands, yes. And the reason is we can't go back and manufacture those cars. That's done. Those new cars that were built, and that's what's going to be out there in the marketplace. So yes, that is a real possibility.
And the notion that many people were turning to other types of forms of transportation, whether it be Uber or mass transit, in a city or what have you, that didn't hang around too long, did it? Everybody still wants their own vehicle, it seems.
Well, it turns out that, you do what you can do.
Yeah.
So yes, in certain circumstances, Uber is going to be the best. There's many instances where Lyft and Uber are, great. But it turns out, I think one of the things that we saw both during COVID and post-COVID is that people still have an appetite for, I want my own space, I want to determine my own schedule, and I want the amenities that are going to make my day and my life just a little bit better.
So in terms of used car prices, and dealers are sitting right now, obviously, with used car inventories on their lot, will we see the value of those used cars at this point in time for 2024 increase from your perspective?
I think it's going to take time, but again, on model by model, yes, perhaps that's true, because the shortage is going to start to catch up. I don't think that would be the case with volume cars. I think you're always going to have, just as an example, Jeeps are going to be, they're going to transact higher just because of they're just a thing.
Right.
But in terms of, I think electric cars is one thing that will come down quite a bit, but some of those specialty cars that they didn't make many of, or people weren't buying many of, I think those are the ones where there's the biggest profit opportunity, and people are going to see higher prices on those.
Sure. Brian Moody, Executive Editor at Cox Automotive, thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching, all of you out there. I really appreciate it. And we're now streaming on Roku and Apple TV, so you can find us now in 70 million households. So we are just a click away on all screens. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.